received a thumb down from my wife, but I didn't say it. She said it's not that funny, and maybe it's not. But there was a kindergarten teacher who wanted the children to come and do show and tell and talk a little bit about their religion and to bring an item to share. So the next day, they all had their turn, and Tommy came up first and he said, I'm Catholic and this is a crucifix. The next child came up and he says, I'm Johnny and I'm LDS and this is a Book of Mormon. And the little Simon came up and he said, I'm Jewish and this is a menorah. And then finally, little Bob came up and he said, I'm Baptist and this is a casserole. Those who know now? Yes. So try as I might, I am not generally one to do a verse by verse study of anything. So this is kind of different for me, and my biggest struggle is when to not be the Energizer Bunny and keep going and going. So I struggle with how much information do I give about each verse, historically, culturally, contextually, and so forth, and how much do I leave out. So at the end of the day, today we'll get through the first chapter of Galatians. So it's not even a long chapter, but I feel like there's even so much that I left out that we could have said. But next week we'll get into 2nd Galatians, which I think is even more problematic for many. But today let's start with this. And as a follow-up to what I said before we started our Torah reading, classically any synagogue should be 3 things. It should be a Beit Knesset, a house of gathering. It should be a Beit Tefillah, a house of prayer. And it should be a Beit Midrash, which is a house of study. I would add to that our own name, Beit Tikva. What does that mean for us to be a house of hope in this valley? And I was speaking with Jason earlier before service started when we were setting up. And one thing that I like to do is to look for gaps in things. And primarily I think about this with regards to students, especially my students that have disabilities or behavioral issues. And they're neither all bad nor all good. And there are things, whether they are historically part of their family, their upbringing, or based on a disability, but it creates gaps in their ability to function successfully. So what can we do as teachers or parents or people to help fill those gaps, help make them feel valued and loved and successful and capable of doing great things? Well, I also look at that for this valley. There are a lot of churches, there are a lot of organizations that do things and great things in this valley. What is the gap that's here? What is something that we as a community can pray for and look forward to and create as a vision for us? Whether that be going and sharing with the community, serving people, even just within our own walls. So something for you to think and pray about is a vision for this coming year. What can we do as a group to help be gap fillers? All right, so Galatians. We'll start at the beginning, chapter 1, verses 1 through 2. Shaul, an apostle, not sent from men nor through the agency of man, but through Yeshua the Messiah and God the Father, who raised him from the dead, and all the brethren who are with me, to the assemblies of Galatia. Before I start, though, I wanted to briefly touch, because I didn't mention this in here, but I said last time, talking about who are these influencers, who are these Judaizers that have come in and caused a stir among this assembly in this community? Who are these people, and why are they saying or adding to the gospel that was taught to them? And a very intriguing thing, if we look historically, is that Rome, I mentioned this briefly at the end last time, Rome in any community or group of people that they conquered and ruled basically forbade them from worshiping in their own religion or their style. It was unheard of. You don't do these things. If you do, they're in secret, and if we catch you, you're either imprisoned or executed. Period. That was what it was. But for whatever reason, with the Jews, they allowed them a certain degree of freedom in religious expression. They could meet together, which was unheard of. They could say their prayers to a certain extent, which was unheard of. And one of the things that we say even today in an undertone, that part where it says, "Blessed is he whose kingdom is forever and ever," that was kind of a stickler for the Roman authorities because there was only one kingdom, and that was Caesar's kingdom. And how dare you say that any kingdom is greater than that? So, of course, faithful Jewish people weren't going to stop saying that because they believed that God's kingdom, of course, is the greatest. So they started saying it in undertones. In case there were any authorities listening, they wouldn't hear that particular part, and it's something that's continued to this day. But some people have suggested that in order for them to maintain the peace with the Roman authorities, which were allowing this sort of unsettled kind of agreement that you can be Jewish and even express yourself in that way, as long as you don't do other sorts of things. Well, if the Roman authorities saw something new, like a new body of believers in this Yeshua person, they may no longer see them as Jewish. So there was genuine fear in that community that maybe if they ceased to see us as Jews, then they might cease to allow us to meet together and express our faith in this way. So an intriguing idea that maybe that's why they were pushing not only gospel, but circumcision. Gospel plus this, because that would maintain that appearance of we are Jews still. And so that could have been one of the fears why they were changing things. Shaul opens his letter to the Galatians, laying forth who he is in relationship to what is going on in their assemblies. He states that he is Shaul, an apostle. In declaring himself to be an emissary, Shaul is claiming to be one sent on the full authority of God with a specific mission and purpose. Shaul here is not simply claiming himself to be a person sent out, and especially not sent out by human appointment or human commission, as though he were sent only by the authorization of the assembly of Antioch, or even Jerusalem. On the contrary, Shaul is claiming to be an apostle, Yeshua the Messiah, and God the Father. Those in Galatia had questioned, as we know, Shaul's authenticity as an apostle. And so much of Galatians 1 is spent with Shaul reasserting his status to them. He's making an appeal. He claims that it was the Creator himself who commissioned himself as an apostle. He claims that by virtue of that, he has every right to be there saying the things he says and being who he is. This would have been contrary to the likely sentiments of his opponents, some of whom claim to have been sent from James. His claims seem to me to echo the commissioning of Amos as a prophet. It says in Amos 7:14 and 15, "Then Amos replied to Amaziah, I am not a prophet, nor am I the son of a prophet, for I am a herdsman and a grower of sycamore figs. But Adonai took me from following the flock, and Adonai said to me, Go, prophesy to my people Israel." So a claim has been established at the beginning of the letter, or rather a reassertion of that claim. Notice that in his opening letter to the Galatians, he includes all of the brethren who are with me, or all of the members of God's family who are with me, depending on the translation. Shaul is not just including those people as though they are extending greetings to the Galatians, but these are associates of Shaul in Syrian Antioch who agreed with the conclusions that he has drawn and summarized in his epistle. Among these associates likely included Barnabas, of course, who had ministered with Shaul during his first journey that took him to Galatia. Verses 3 through 7. Grace to you and shalom from God our Father and the Lord Yeshua the Messiah, who gave himself for our sins so that he might rescue us from this present evil age, according to the will of our God and Father, to whom be the glory forevermore. I am amazed that you are so quickly deserting him who called you by the grace of Messiah for a different gospel, which is really not another, only there are some who are disturbing you and want to distort the gospel of Messiah. Shaul was disturbed with how the Galatians seem to have quickly been performing negative actions, how they have been doing something and adding something to what he had previously said to them and taught them. But had the Galatians at this point totally left the path of faith, or were they in the process of becoming apostate? Being relatively new and naive in matters of spirituality, it would not have been difficult for outsiders to have entered in and made claims about the Torah, claims that the Torah does not even claim for itself. Moshe admonished ancient Israel, "You shall observe to do just as Adonai your God has commanded you. You shall not turn aside to the right or to the left." That was Devarim 5:13. The Torah's instruction was to detail the Holy One's standard of right and wrong, his standard of holiness, not to show us that by keeping it, people could gain favor or salvation with him, even though with obedience comes blessing. Certainly, if one does not rely on God's grace for salvation, then falling back for one's redemption to be accomplished via human action is a dangerous position in which to find oneself. Even though the Galatians, it seems, were not falling into full-fledged idolatry, the consequences of them turning their focus away from Yeshua would be the same as ancient Israel disobeying Hashem during the Exodus or the period of Judges. Thus, Shaul's amazement and his concern at what had transpired in Galatia. Verses 8 through 12. "But even if we, or an angel from heaven, should preach to you a gospel contrary to what we have preached to you, he is to be accursed. As we have said before, so I again say now, if any man is preaching to you a gospel contrary to what you received, he is to be accursed. For am I now seeking the favor of men or of God? Or am I striving to please men? If I were still trying to please men, I would not be a bondservant of Messiah. For I would have you know, brethren, that the gospel which was preached by me is not according to man. For I neither received it from man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Yeshua the Messiah." Shaul contends that his ministry as an apostle is not to seek human approval for what he is doing, but rather his mission is to diligently serve the Holy One. It is important, I believe, to have a proper perspective on how Shaul describes himself as not being a people pleaser. There are those who maintain that Shaul would have remained a Pharisee if he wished to be a people pleaser. I think this is grossly unfair of the nature of the Pharisaical approach to God, as well as a misunderstanding of Shaul's Jewishness, especially as much later he would declare before the Sanhedrin, "I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. I am on trial for the hope and resurrection of the dead." He said that in Acts 23:6. Unfortunately, embedded in the minds of many interpreters of Galatians is the idea that in saying that he does not desire to please people, Shaul has completely turned his back on his Jewish heritage. The challenge was not what was to be done with the Jewish believers in Yeshua, who would naturally be expected to continue to live according to the norms of their Jewish faith. The challenge, rather, relates to what was to be done with the non-Jews, and whether the Torah was to be a part of their expression of faith. Most commentators are in agreement that the Torah was not to be part of the faith expression of the non-Jewish believers in Shaul's mission. Yet this idea is removed from the messianic expectation that the Torah would go forth from Zion and would instruct all nations. We read in Micah 4:2, "Many nations will come and say, 'Come, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us about his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For from Zion shall go forth the Torah, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem.'" These views that those who keep God's Torah will be blessed in the Messianic age are mirrored in the Talmud. A commentary on the book of Habakkuk, discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls of Qumran, is even more poignant. It says, "The traders with the men of the lie have not obeyed the words of the teacher of righteousness from the mouth of God." It also refers to the traders of the new covenant, because they did not believe in God's covenant and desecrated his holy name. The Kittim are swift and mighty in war, annihilating many people, and in the authority of the Kittim and the wicked, and have no faith in the laws of God. These views from both the Pharisees and the Qumran community reflect the fact that as a part of God sending his Messiah to earth, his people were to demonstrate some kind of renewed obedience to his Torah, especially in view of lawlessness that would be abounding. For many Christian theologians, they conclude that what made Shaul different from his opponents was that he was denying this idea, in spite of it being a clear thrust of the Tanakh and a major part of Jewish Christological expression. And I was having this conversation with Stephanie earlier, that I think also a clear distinction is many people within the church need Paul to not be Jewish. They need him to be completely separated from that, because the Jewish expression of faith in God is obedience. Whereas they want somehow the expression of faith in the Messiah to be freedom. Freedom from all obedience. We're free to do as we please because we are saved by grace. And I think that's a huge stickler, which explains why they so clearly need Paul to be a new Christian, the first Christian, non-Jewish. It's an interesting idea. Shaul, it seems, had no intention of trying to make any concessions to his detractors. He saw what happened to the people, and he was greatly disturbed. Verses 13 to 14. And these are always a stickler for people who want to remove Torah from the lives of modern believers in Yeshua. For you have heard of my former manner of life in Judaism, how I used to persecute the assembly of God beyond measure and tried to destroy it. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries among my countrymen, being more extremely zealous for my ancestral traditions. Remember, he originally was part of this yoke, this house of Hillel, which is a much calmer, more obedient, kind of the idea that in order for Israel to be freed from its oppressors, and in this case Rome at that time, the answer was to be strictly adherent to all of what Torah was commanding, and to do it quietly and studiously. He followed that house, that yoke, for a very long time. And then he slowly became influenced by this other house, one that was much more prone to zealousness, and not only zealousness for both the written Torah, but also the oral Torah, and this idea that if we are going to get rid of our oppressors, it's up to us to take action, to persecute and get rid of them. That was the idea. So even beyond what most Pharisees saw or believed, there were groups of people who took this to the next level, so to speak. Shaul offers the Galatians a bit of his autobiography to qualify himself as the one who can properly refute the errors of the influencers in Galatians who were attempting to add to the gospel as Shaul had presented it in his previous visit. The critical issue, in view of verse 13, is not that Shaul abandoned Judaism when he came to faith in Messiah. The issue was Shaul's radical behavior in likely accordance with the sect to which he fervently belonged. In verse 14, which we just read, Shaul indicates that he advanced in his Jewish studies beyond many of the movement who were his age. The reason he gives is his zealousness for the traditions of his ancestors. Shaul was not negligent in his duties as a Pharisee, but he apparently did go beyond the normal level of Jewish religious observance when compared to many of his contemporaries. His unfettered zealousness led to his intense longing to exterminate the group of Jews who followed Yeshua of Nazareth. Shaul's zeal was not just to keep up what he believed was a correct interpretation of Torah, and that strict adherence to the law coupled with action led him to want to do all in his power to end what he saw as an apostate and evil movement. He indicates that he obeyed the oral law, the Shebal Peh, the regulations passed down orally that in Pharisaical Judaism are believed to have a direct line of authority that comes from Sinai. How are we to interpret the later clause in verse 14? It is difficult for many today in this Messianic movement, especially among those who want little to do with extra-biblical tradition. While it is absolutely true that Shaul's zealousness led him to both persecute the early believers and keep the oral Torah, statements made by Shaul after his experience on the road to Damascus indicate that he did not deviate from his traditional Jewish lifestyle. Verse 15. But when God, who had set me apart even from my mother's womb, and called me through his grace, was pleased. The word Shaul uses here to describe his calling are reminiscent of those who had previously been called out by Hashem before, especially the servant Messiah and the prophet Jeremiah. We read in Isaiah 49:1, "Listen to me, O islands, and pay attention, you peoples from afar. Adonai called me from the womb. From the body of my mother, he named me." And in Jeremiah 1:5, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I have appointed you a prophet to the nations." Verses 16 and 17 are very interesting, and the source of many questions about Shaul's relationship, both then and later, with the other apostles. Let us read them. "To reveal his Son in me, so that I might preach him among the Gentiles. I did not immediately consult with flesh and blood, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me. But I went away to Arabia and returned once more to Damascus." After encountering the living Messiah on the road to Damascus, Shaul says that he did not confer with flesh and blood, as his mission had been assigned directly from the Lord. Shaul's mission was to go out to the nations and proclaim the goodness of the God of Israel and the redemption that was available in his Son. Ironically, Shaul's training as a Pharisee under Gamaliel probably made him the most qualified for the unique work that God had for him among the nations. But it seems, for whatever reason, he needed to prepare. He says he did not go up to Jerusalem to those who had become apostles before him. Why did he not go to Jerusalem immediately after seeing his epiphany? Some believe that Shaul was acting completely independently of Jerusalem, and he would not have cared for their approval. Others believe that the Gentile mission that Shaul was being prepared to undertake would not have been readily accepted by the Jerusalem leaders so soon after the resurrection and ascension of Yeshua, and of course Shaul's persecution of those who followed. Verses 18 to 19. "Then, 3 years later, I went up to Jerusalem to become acquainted with Cephas," that is, Kepha, or Peter, "and stayed with him 15 days. But I did not see any of the other apostles except Yaakov, James, the Lord's brother." Did Shaul stay in Arabia for the full 3 years? Or is this just a timestamp on how long God was preparing him? We do not know for certain what he did in Arabia, only that he was contemplating future ministry. Nevertheless, he went to Jerusalem 3 years later. This is likely the visit described in Acts 9, starting with verse 26, which is even more enlightening given its description of how the other apostles viewed this newcomer, Shaul. When he came to Jerusalem, he was trying to associate with the disciples, but they were all afraid of him, not believing that he was a disciple. But Barnabas took hold of him and brought him to the apostles and described to them how he had seen the Lord on the road, and that he had talked to him, and how at Damascus he had spoken out boldly in the name of Yeshua. If it is true that the book of Acts was written by Luke, then we can safely say that this is a fair description of what happened and the sentiments that were held by the other apostles at this time. All of this most likely took place around 35 CE. As Shaul tells the Galatians, his interest was to get to know Cephas and James the Just, although Acts 9:26 does indicate that he met all the apostles. We are not told anything specific about Shaul's encounter with Kepha or Yaakov, but we may safely presume that he received at least some preliminary approval for his efforts. Shaul was still a controversial figure, not because of his claims, the claims made against him by the influencers in Galatia. He was controversial because many of the believers in Jerusalem did not think he was a true disciple. Shaul's mention of James is of particular importance in refuting the idea that Shaul was anti-Torah. James the Just, Yaakov, the brother of Messiah, is the one who is known as being very devout to his obedience to Torah. James was also not one of the original 12 apostles. just like Shaul. Mentioning both Kepha and Yaakov would have been significant, as Shaul's opponents in Galatia could have claimed some kind of authority from both of these leaders. Shaul testifies that he had encountered them himself and did not receive any initial opposition from them. And finally, verses 20 to 24. Now in what I am writing to you, I assure you before God that I am not lying. Then I went into the regions of Syria and Cilicia. I was still unknown by sight to the assemblies of Judea, which were in Messiah. But only they kept hearing, he who once persecuted us is now preaching the faith which he once tried to destroy. And they were glorifying God because of me. Following Shaul's initial meeting with the Jerusalem apostles, he says he was unknown by face to those in Judea. While some Judean believers encountered Shaul during his first visit to Jerusalem, on the whole, none had seen him. By going out to the nations and proclaiming the gospel among a new group of people who had not heard of him or his offenses prior to his encounter with the divine, Shaul was able to develop credibility for his mission. He was determined to redeem his negative reputation that he had earned when he was a persecutor of followers of Messiah. At the end, he tells the Galatians that they were, in fact, glorifying the Holy One because of him. This does not seem to indicate that the Judean assemblies disapproved of Shaul going out to the nations and proclaiming the gospel. And then there's more difficulty in chapter 2, but we'll save that for next week. A lot more difficulty.
We have to come back for next week.
It just gets more complex and difficult. All right. What are your thoughts as you read this week, or had thoughts in general? Yes, sir?